Perfect. So with that, hello, NCIA members and supporters, and welcome to another edition of NCIA's educational webinar series. My name is Brian Gilbert, and I serve as the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity of introducing yet another fantastic educational opportunity for you all this morning. We will be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. So as I just instructed, if you have any questions for the panelists, don't hesitate to pose them using the chat feature by sending them to everyone in the meeting. Myself and another colleague who's managing our Facebook live stream and a Twitter thread will be compiling questions throughout the panel, and we will do a moderated Q&A at the end of the presentation. At the conclusion of that Q&A portion of the presentation, please do stay on as we'll close out the program with some really important announcements regarding our upcoming events, as well as a really cool sneak peek of our new Industry Essentials brand of educational webinars, which will be debuting with an all-star panel of industry experts next week. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Good Manufacturing Practices in the Age of COVID-19, being moderated by Andrew Klein, the Director of Public Policy here at NCIA. Take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. At least good morning west of the Mississippi. Good afternoon on the East Coast. And welcome to our webinar on good manufacturing practices in the age of the coronavirus. As the cannabis industry professionalizes, many manufacturers have taken upon themselves to voluntarily comply with good manufacturing practices. Some perhaps have not. Today, we're going to explore what good manufacturing practices mean, why they're important, and how the cannabis industry can lead on issues of public health, particularly in the age of coronavirus. We have with us today 4 experts, 2 from reputable manufacturers of THC and CBD edibles that go above and beyond what's required of them in good manufacturing practices, and 2 testing and food safety experts. I'm going to just call on each panelist to introduce themselves. I would ask that you tell us a little bit about your company, including the products that you manufacture or test. I'll start with Trevor from Control Point, and I'll just say, Trevor, thank you for being a member of the Policy Council and for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Just a little bit of background for myself, and then we'll get into Control Point. I was introduced to the cannabis world because my family has a long line of epilepsy. During my career, I started washing dishes in restaurants and moved my way to New York City and then got into food manufacturing. It's a very challenging environment there, very competitive. So if I wasn't the fastest, I had to bring on more assets to set myself apart. And food safety happened to be one of those things, as well as processing products. I was introduced to a project where we were writing food safety standards against a benchmark, a global food safety initiative benchmark. And through that process, I was actually getting diagnosed with epilepsy myself, and don't need any sympathy or empathy. It's a journey that I have to live with every single day. But because of this, there's a huge interest in finding a way to be an asset for the entire industry. So cannabis is very close to me medically and professionally. And the objective is to make sure that people are getting health and wellness without anything else. But disregard the tone difference in my voice. It's just a device that doesn't actually work for me, but is on and functioning. Food safety reference for those that are familiar with it. And through this process, we built Control Point. Control Point is designed to be boots on the ground with operations so that we're not standing from the towers to say, go left or go right. We're actually in the trenches with staff, with team members to create a culture that will survive and be ongoing. But we're involved in food manufacturing, beverage operations as well, and then all of those things within the cannabis industry, everything from cultivation to dispensaries. And we've been able to sit on the Infused Product Committee, which is now the Cannabis Manufacturing Committee, as well as the Policy Council.
Thanks, Trevor. I'm next going to ask Jen to introduce herself and her company. First, let me just say that Wana, in my estimation, is one of the best products on the market. And Wana just hired the best marketer in the industry in Joe Hodis. Let me turn it over to Jen.
Hi guys, my name's Jen Comperta and I'm the Quality Assurance Manager for Wana Brands. I actually also come from the restaurant world. I did a lot of time in food and learned food safety through that. Wana Brands is a manufacturer of cannabis products, and we strive to enhance people's life physically, creatively, and emotionally through this responsible use of cannabis. Our brand's most famously known for the vegan THC and hemp sour gummy lines, and they're kind of square shape. But we also manufacture hard-pressed tarts, vaporizer cartridges, and also a quick tincture line to help kind of round out our brand.
Thanks, Jen. Next up is Alina, and I'll just say Alina is one of the brightest minds in the cannabis industry and a huge contributor to the Policy Council. So thank you for being here, Alina.
Thank you for having me. My name is Alina Rodriguez. I'm the Managing Director at RM3 Labs. A little bit about myself is I came from academic research. I've been in the industry going on 5 years now, working in testing. And RM3 Labs is a state certified lab in Colorado. We're the oldest. We've been operating since 2009. We do the compliance and mandated testing as well as voluntary testing for hemp and cannabis clients. We perform potency and terpene analysis. We do contaminant testing such as microbials, heavy metals. Oh, well, actually, we're working on heavy metals, but microbials, residual solvents, pesticides, that sort of stuff. And we also provide consulting services to our clients if they're having problems failing tests. We can go into their facilities and do swabbing and other things and recommend different procedures to help with their testing problems.
Thank you, Alina. And last but not least, Haley, Mary's Brands, one of the greatest brands right here in Colorado. And General Counsel of Mary's is, of course, Eduardo Provencio, one of my most favorite people in the industry and a leading contributor to the Policy Council. Thank you for being here, Haley. Haley, you still with us?
Are you muted, Haley?
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Haley Bransgard, and I'm the Senior Quality and Compliance Manager for Mary's Brands. I've been in the cannabis space and with Mary's for about 7 months now. I have a background in food safety and food production, and I've obtained many food safety related certificates, including HACCP, food defense, preventive controls, qualified individual, and I'm also an SQF practitioner. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in bakery science and management from K-State, and after graduation, I worked in the food industry for just over 5 years, and then was offered this great opportunity to work for Mary's. So at Mary's, we produce a wide range of products, including transdermal patches, topicals, vapes, and tinctures, using primarily THC and CBD. And we have products for both human consumption and pets. And for that reason, it was very important that we ensure that we're doing everything that we can to create a safe product of consistent quality for our consumers, which is exactly why we implemented our CGMP program.
Awesome. Thank you, Haley. We're going to start right off with a question for Alina. Alina, GMPs are not light trucks. What are they?
GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. They are the FDA's formal regulations for the minimum requirements to maintain quality operations in a manufacturing facility. They're used in the food, dietary supplements, pharmaceutical, and cosmetic industries. GMPs are a system to ensure that products are consistently produced according to quality standards, and it includes all aspects of your production process. So that includes the facility you're creating your products in, the equipment you're using, the materials you're using, how you store things, how you record things, how you train your staff, and how you investigate quality deviations, and of course, testing.
And thanks for that. Alina, what does the C stand for in CGMPs? And why is it important?
So C stands for current. It's important, and it was added to signal to companies that they need to be using up-to-date technologies and systems to comply with GMP regulations, rather than using something that may have worked 10 or 20 years ago.
Makes sense. And are these standards voluntary or required? And are the majority of cannabis companies following these guidelines?
So right now, there's no formal GMPs required for the cannabis industry. However, some cannabis companies are following GMP guidelines for the uninfused product type that they're manufacturing. For example, edible manufacturers can follow the food industry's GMPs.
And who sets these GMPs or these requirements?
So the FDA sets these regulations, and when our industry becomes federally legal, we do expect the FDA to make GMP requirements for cannabis.
Great. Let's turn to Trevor for a few questions. What happens if a product is produced in a facility that doesn't meet GMPs?
This is an excellent question, and I think it weighs into the value of GMP practices in an operation. To get to the point, if the entire operation is not under GMP standards, then that introduces risks to the operation. We have operational downtime, we have inconsistent products, the culture of the operation may not be existent or may not be consistently practiced throughout. Therefore, the products could be questionable. How is one proving that their product is safe for the consumers? Now we have wonderful labs like where Elena comes from that we send our products to test. That's one piece of this particular instance, but we have to make sure that everything else get up into that point is actually keeping the product safe. And GMPs are not a copy and paste from one operation to another. It's specific to one operation, those four walls and that roof. So they can be very different from the neighbor that's doing something similar.
We hear this term, Trevor bantered about, adulterated. What does that mean? Is it a technical term of art?
It's a technical term, but it generally insists that the product is inferior because of contaminants being present in it. And if the product is indeed contaminated, what is being done to prevent contamination from any further, or the corrective action to extract the contamination if that is indeed possible? I think that conversation can go on because the scenarios change each time.
And who currently regulates the sale and manufacture of food and beverages? Is that, as Elena was saying, exclusively within FDA's purview, or?
Well, FDA has everything that is not meat and poultry and shell eggs, because those things are FSIS, USDA, everything else is FDA. Interesting, we have been operating in the USDA the same way that FDA requires now, like through the Food Safety Modernization Act, using global food safety initiatives. So we've had this idea of preventive controls, and we've been implementing it through the course. But when the food safety, when FSMA was signed in 2011, it didn't go into effect until roughly 2016, and we're still short on regulators through FSMA.
And would you say that the cannabis industry is technically manufacturing food and beverages, or is it something else?
Oh, it's absolutely manufacturing, and this is an excellent question that was brought up for an operation out in Rhode Island, and they were being listed as not a manufacturer, but they were indeed manufacturing. If we look at other raw materials, it could be grains, and we cultivate the grains, we harvest the grains. If there's an extraction present for some reason, then that is manufacturing. All these processes are they're finely connected like a beautiful Swiss watch. All these gears work together.
Tell us, Trevor, a little bit about what's happening in Florida as it relates to GMPs.
Excellent. I was able to follow up on that this morning, and it states, let me actually get at 381.986, if you go down to 9, it tells you that you have to, once you are licensed, you have approximately a year to get a GMP certification, or you go for GFSI, and it has to be consistent with that, which is funny because GFSI, underneath that umbrella of food safety schemes, almost every single scheme has a component of GMP requirements in it.
Can you just summarize that in plain English, just in a sentence for folks who don't know what those acronyms might mean?
Yes, in the state of Florida, once your license is there, start working on GMP immediately. Where do you start? Start with the culture first and your management commitment. Don't worry about GFSI right now, and I know that this is somewhat guidance, but GFSI is a much bigger project. Let's just go for GMP first and foremost.
That's super helpful. So we've talked about food and beverage. What about dietary supplements or pharmaceutical products or cosmetics? Is the cannabis industry producing other products that the FDA may be regulating?
Absolutely. And the funny thing about the GMPs, they cross connect through all these industries. And this is why we're seeing so many people, we're taking people from the other sectors to apply them to the cannabis space because it's very valuable to us. What have they practiced before? How is it applicable to what we want to do or are doing?
Do you think there should be good manufacturing practices required in cannabis? And if so, why?
I do because it allows you're setting up your management system, and you're implementing you're implementing your management system to make sure that you're consistently hitting those same things again, and you already have a plan in place for what happens if things go south.
Super helpful. Let's turn to Haley. Haley, I'd like to just get into some of the nitty gritty here. What are the 6 major sections of CGMPs and what are their significance?
Yeah, so the 6 major sections are going to be management commitment, risk management, quality management systems, site and facility management, product controls, and staff training. So all of these sections are really ongoing systems within your facility, and I'll kind of break these down on how each one plays a key role. So management commitment, this will always be an ongoing commitment for management and employees. Without management commitment, your quality systems will simply fail. It's important to keep management actively engaged in CGMPs and their commitment to supply safe products. As far as risk management, this is going to help you identify where you have potential hazards in your facility that could affect the safety and quality of your products. Once you've performed a risk assessment and identified those hazards and their likelihood and severity, systems should be put in place to minimize or eliminate those hazards from occurring. So for example, a potential physical hazard could contaminate, for example, a potential physical hazard could be product contamination from hair from your employees. And one way to minimize that hazard would be implementing mandatory wear of hairnets in the facility. The quality management system. So this is something that should be reviewed at minimum on an annual basis. The review should include monthly updates for site management, policies outlined in the company's policy statement, findings from the regularly scheduled internal and external audits, customer complaints, test records, deviation reports, really just everything under the scope of the quality management system. So the review should be conducted by senior management with the objective of ensuring that continued integrity of the quality management system. And the purpose of these reviews is to really help measure the effectiveness of the system put in place and quality objectives established by senior management, and also the effectiveness of the corrective actions taken in response to deficiencies in the system. For site and facility management, this is really targeted more towards inspecting and monitoring your actual facility and grounds. So it's important to regularly monitor your facility and grounds and identify any nonconformities, making proper corrections, and then implementing corrective and preventive actions where necessary. So a good way to do this is daily or weekly CGMP inspections. These are extremely helpful and will help hold you, your management team, and staff accountable for complying with CGMPs. Next is product controls. So product controls should be put in place to ultimately ensure that you're producing a safe quality product So what that means is there are safeguards put in place, like potentially screens and sifters, metal detectors, magnets, temperature controls, etc. Many of the hazards that you've identified within your risk management system should then be addressed through your product controls. Product controls are also very important when it comes to product consistency, especially if you're producing in multiple states. So companies can fine-tune their process and they're best equipped to handle regulatory variations and create something that is consistent and ultimately earns brand loyalty. And then there's staff training. So next to management commitment, this is an extremely important piece to maintain within your facility systems. It's key to create and maintain a robust staff training program. And if your staff isn't properly trained in your CGMPs, it will be very difficult to remain compliant with your own policies and procedures. So just ensure that you have a new hire training program and an annual refresher training program at minimum. I've always found it's useful to hold monthly training sessions with all staff. That way you can cover several topics at a time, ensure that all training topics get covered within the year, and then it also really just helps to keep staff engaged and consistently thinking about CGMPs.
Thanks, Haley. There's a lot to unpack there. Are any
Yes.
of these any of these sections more important than the others in cannabis?
So really each of these sections plays a key role in the development and management of a CGMP program. However, like I kind of mentioned earlier, without management commitment and effective staff training, really the entire program is likely to fail.
We don't want that. Thank you, Haley. Jen, why are GMPs particularly important in manufacturing?
Yeah, great question. CGMPs are important in manufacturing because they help ensure the identity, strength, and quality and the purity of the food or drug that is being manufactured. So the GMP guidelines ensure consistency and repeatability in the manufacturing process. They do this by providing systems that assure proper design, monitoring, and control of the manufacturing processes and facilities. If and when a defect or a variance or a deviation does occur, it is very important that it's documented and resolved quickly because that will help reduce the company's waste and overall protect the brand image.
Jen, you mentioned repeatability. Can you just explain a little bit about what that means and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. Repeatability at its core is the ability to produce a part or component exactly the same every single time. Now, when used in the context of CGMPs, it alludes to the ability to be accurate and precise. Without repeatability in process, there is a chance that the finished product's quality will ultimately be affected. One thing that's also important to note is that employee training is critical, like Haley just said. A good machine with a trained operator will produce consistency and repeatability. If the operator is not trained or skilled, then repeatable results are not going to occur, and deviations ultimately will arise. As a manufacturer, the goal is to provide the consumer with the same finished product every time they purchase it, and the GMPs help guide the manufacturers to achieve this.
Jen, in the age of coronavirus, are there extra precautions that one is taking or that other companies should be taking, either in the manufacturing of inhalables like 510 cartridges or edibles, gummies or other edibles?
Yeah, absolutely. And we will actually touch a little bit more on this a little later, but one of the biggest things you can do as a company currently is space people out and ensure they're at least 6 feet away from each other. When manufacturing inhalables, we recommend taking the extra precaution of using protective masks to prevent the airborne transfer of particles into the cartridges. And then always remind and encourage respiratory etiquette. What that means is covering coughs and sneezes. And then after a cough or sneeze does occur on the production line, remembering to wash your hands, sanitize, and change your gloves. It's always important to check in with, your team daily to make sure that if anyone is experiencing symptoms, they are, isolating and following CDC's recommended steps to self-isolate.
Thanks, Jen. A lot of responsibility.
Yes.
Alina, can you just tell us a little bit about the testing that's being done to support good manufacturing practices?
Sure. Well, the GMP requirements were established to be flexible to allow each individual manufacturer to best implement the scientific testing methods. CGMPs don't specify how many units you need to test on a batch, what analytes or contaminants to look for, or how often to test, but rather they established guiding principles that you need to follow when designing a testing program to monitor your manufacturing process. So some examples of these principles include creating samples that are representative of your entire batch and using test methods that are suitable and appropriate to determine if your products meet predetermined specifications for approval and release.
You mentioned representative of a batch. How would you know if something is representative of a batch, and what's the rationale for only testing some, if rather than all products?
So to make a representative test sample, there's many different ways and there's many different sampling plans that you can follow. But mainly what your goal is to make sure that you're getting, if for instance, if you're going to sample flour and maybe you hold your flour in bins, you don't want to just take your sample from one bin if you have your batch stored in 10 bins. You want to take a little bit from each of the 10 bins. For products that are individually packaged, you would want to sample from the beginning of your manufacturing line, the middle, and the end, rather than just one part of the manufacturing cycle. And the rationale for testing just some of your products is because it would be impossible to test every product for every contaminant out there. I mean, first of all, if you test every unit, you won't have anything to sell. And secondly, if you test or try to test for every contaminant or use every indicator test out there, it's wildly unrealistic, it's costly, and it really doesn't help ensure quality and safety. Therefore, industries using GMPs and creating their own testing regimens to monitor their manufacturing practices, they're using risk-based analyses. These determine what to test for, how often to test throughout your production cycle. And we do this by assessing the probabilities and the consequences of the different risks to your products.
Is that an effective methodology?
I think so. I think risk-based assessments are effective because they consider the likelihood that a contaminant will be present in your product and the severity of the consequence if it reaches a consumer. So contaminants with high probability of being in specific products that would be detrimental if they were consumed, those are where companies are focusing to comply with GMPs and doing testing that is in that regard. It should be noted, just like Trevor said before, that testing alone does not assure quality and safety. While GMPs require testing, it's only one piece to the puzzle. The entire GMP system is required to assure safety and quality is built into every step of the manufacturing process.
That's helpful. Thanks, Elena. Haley, I want to just turn to some questions about the FDA. Does every industry regulated by the FDA have its own guidelines for good manufacturing practices?
Yes, they do. So each industry does have their own guidelines, and the industries that the FDA regulate are going to be food and drugs, medical devices, radiation emitting products, vaccines, blood and biologics, animal and veterinary, and then also cosmetics and tobacco products. So you are going to see many similarities in the GMPs between each category, even though they are regulated separately.
And are those guidelines codified in federal law somewhere? Or?
Yes. Each category has their own set of regulations within the Code of Federal Regulations. However, the Code of Federal Regulations includes much more than the categories I just mentioned. So our main focus in the cannabis industry when it comes to CGMPs is going to be CFR Title 21, which is food and drugs. So this title covers all FDA regulated items, and from there the regulations are broken down into parts. So for example, CFR Title 21 Part 117 is going to be CGMPs for human food, and then Part 111 is CGMPs for dietary supplements and so on. So each facility will need to really determine which part within the Title 21 best applies to the products that they're producing.
For those of you out there who don't know what regulations are, basically Congress, when Congress passes a law and provides authority to an agency, that agency then can create regulations that that supplant that federal regulation and explain in greater detail the authority that that agency believes that has been bestowed upon it by Congress. I'm assuming, Haley, that cannabis is not included in that list that's contained in the federal code.
That is correct. Cannabis has not been added to that yet.
Okay. What happens if your company has multiple product lines? How do you follow each guideline?
Yeah, so for example, Mary's makes tinctures for human consumption, pet products, and personal care products. So we just need to ensure that we're complying with the CGMPs in each category. Many of the requirements will overlap, but you do need to make sure that you're identifying any differences within the regulations. So in my opinion, it's kind of best to identify which regulations are the most stringent and then implement them through SOPs across all of your product lines. And I mean, it really never hurts to have stricter quality standards.
Jen, are all GMP topics covered in the Code of Federal Regulations?
Yeah, as Haley mentioned, that all GMP topics are covered in the CFR. However, it's important to remember that they are basic requirements. So as the world progresses and we have the new technologies that come out, they should be adopting those new policies and technologies.
Just a follow-up question for you, Jen. How can cannabis companies lead, even though they're not included in the regulations? How can they get ahead of a potential problem?
Absolutely. You know, with cannabis companies being a medicinal drug, consistency and dependability of manufacturing processes are key. GMPs guide businesses to accomplish this. So cannabis companies can start by reviewing the current CFRs for human food Part 117 and drugs Part 111 and evaluate which category they need to focus on for the products that they're currently manufacturing. Colorado and other state lawmakers have actually written regulations that attempt to standardize the safety and quality through the mandate of laboratory testing, labeling requirements, restrictions of pesticides, and certifications of scales. You know, by reviewing and adopting these GMPs, cannabis companies can assure their patients and customers that their products will be safe, quality, and consistent product. When cannabis does legalize, which it's inevitable on a federal level, cannabis companies that have already taken the time to adopt those GMPs will be ahead of the curve and will already have those systems in place to just keep moving.
Thanks, Jen. All right, we're getting in the weeds here. I hope people are taking notes. Trevor, what are the third-party GMP audits, and are they really necessary?
I think this is going to play off of what we've already shared from each of the panelists, but the good manufacturing practices are the minimum requirements to ensure that products are safe as well as consistent in quality. And I do believe that they are necessary. Are they required? No, unless we go back to the state of Florida. But GMPs or GAP, good agricultural practices, the cultivation GMPs, or ISO certification, these set businesses apart. Just as Jen was saying, this is really what you have to do on the long haul, repetitively every single year. So you don't just let everything pile up and then decide, okay, come January, we're going to knock this out, because it never works like that. You have to slowly go through each program, evaluate them. If they don't need anything, sign off on them and put them back according to your document control and record keeping procedures. But in this, it's simply say what you do and do what you say, and then continuously prove it.
Who conducts these audits?
There are certification bodies that conduct these audits, and you have, they've sponsored for today is ASI, and Tyler's got some interesting things to share about what ASI is doing, and they, NSF or other operations, A2LA for laboratories, are conducting these audits.
Thanks, Trevor. How does a cannabis company know how to comply in order to pass these audits?
When you're ready to sign up, you get in touch with the certification body and you put it on their schedule. We're seeing operations schedule a year in advance, a year and a half in advance, sometimes a little bit more. Audits are still going full force regardless of what we're going through globally. And after that, they will send you what they're going to audit you against. And then you can either do your own analysis or assessment of where gaps are in the operation, or you can bring in somebody to help you. It's entirely up to you.
And these are voluntary, right?
They are voluntary, unless, again, we go back to the state of Florida.
So who pays for them if they're voluntary?
The operation does. They have to pay for the travel, the person's time, any expenses that are generated. But there's, as an auditor, we're practicing auditors at Control Point. We're bouncing around audit after audit after audit. So when we come in, we've set it up and we do an introduction with the team, and then we go through the process of auditing everything on a desk audit, and then we walk through the operation to see the operation in practice. There is no dog and pony show. Be sure to practice as you normally do, even when an auditor is not present. It's quite obvious for the amount of hours that we've continuously audited when things are being done in a untruthful manner.
Thanks for mentioning Tyler, by the way. He's been a huge asset to the Policy Council, and I'm grateful that they sponsored the webinar today. Are most cannabis companies doing this, or?
Great question. We don't know the percentage of companies that are doing it versus not doing it. We see that there is a lot more interest in doing it because of some of the larger names in the cannabis sector around the world. Somebody put out a report last year, and 20 pages in, they highlighted how they were requiring their suppliers of raw materials to go through GMP certification in order for them to be a supplier for that brand. And now that brand is in Canada, Australia, Portugal, Uruguay. I mean, they're popping up everywhere.
Trevor, it sounds like you might need some water.
No, it's my device, my VNS.
Oh.
For my seizures. It goes on. It doesn't actually work for me, but we don't need to get into that. We can talk about that later.
Okay. Alina, what are the three major accreditation bodies, and what are your views on their efficacy?
Well, there's a long list of accredited third-party bodies that can perform GMP audits. You can find them listed on the American National Standard Institution, ANSI, their website. Three major ones I would recommend, and I see some of our attendees have recommended some too. SGS North America, because they are a sponsoring member of NCIA, so we know that they support our industry. And they're also one of the world's largest certification bodies. They do business in over 130 countries and started working in the US certifying in 1919. Another one is Perry Johnson Registrars Food Safety, because they're also a member of NCIA, so we know they support our industry. They are largely recognized, and they have specific cannabis certification programs. And the last one I'll discuss is NSF certification by NSF International, because not only is their company involved in certifying, but they're also involved in developing standards. And you may have recognized the symbol too, but the NSF certified symbol is very well known by consumers.
And I assume that's a benefit, but are there other benefits to using an accredited certification body?
Yes, most companies don't have a CGMP subject matter expert on staff. So using an experienced and accredited certification body to come in and look at your manufacturing processes can shed light on where you can make quality improvements. Also, getting CGMP certified by an accredited body can open doors for you. For example, if you're in the hemp industry, you have the opportunity to sell your products outside of a regulated dispensary system in normal retail outlets. Several of the major retail outlets will actually require your company to be CGMP certified in order to sell your products in their stores. And lastly, the ability to promote your product as being manufactured in a CGMP certified facility can boost sales, as it's an acknowledgement to your company's commitment to go above and beyond what is required for cannabis at this time.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Alina. Haley, turning back to you, are there specific good manufacturing practice related regulations that apply to the cannabis industry, or are we doing this all voluntarily?
So Jen kind of touched on this earlier, but THC is regulated at the state level while CBD is regulated at the federal level. Each state should have guidance documents specific to only their state for THC. But if your company produces in multiple states, you'll need to be sure that you're aware of all state-specific regulations. However, all CGMPs should still be traditionally modeled off of the FDA standards because most states don't have CGMP guidelines in place. There are not regulations that have been put out by the FDA for CBD. However, they have issued many guidance documents, which can be found on their webpage. And it's also very helpful to reference any warning letters that the FDA issues to cannabis companies and even food and beverage manufacturing facilities. That's really going to give you some great insight to what the FDA is focusing on and help you tailor your programs to better prepare you and your facility.
I'm shocked to learn that FDA has not yet released guidance. Do you agree, Haley, that cannabis companies should receive a third-party audit? And if so, why?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Third-party audits are really just a check of your quality system and your compliance to CGMPs. They're going to provide you an understanding of where your facility is at in terms of compliance and identifies any areas where you might need improvement. So if you can identify gaps in your system and implement corrective actions, you're more likely going to avoid major risks like recalls, consumer complaints, or adverse events, and it leads to overall improvement of product safety. And then also, if you're able to receive some kind of certificate or use like a GMP logo or seal on your website or packaging, it can provide comfort to your consumers and customers knowing that, you're doing everything you can to produce a safe quality product for them.
Thank you for that. I've just got a few more questions and then we'll turn it back over to Brian and we can take some questions from the audience. Haley, is it safe to say that states are requiring more than the federal government on cannabis products as it relates to good manufacturing processes at this point, or?
So as mentioned earlier, states are really relying on companies to implement and comply with FDA CGMP standards for whichever category of products they're making. States aren't really enforcing CGMP guidelines themselves. Some of them are starting to implement these things, but most aren't. Some states are even sending in regulators from like restaurants who don't really know what to focus on because they're most likely, won't be well versed in FDA regulations. So a lot of these things are kind of up in the air, but it's really best for companies to start complying with these things now.
Jen, turning back to you, what are internal audits and should companies be doing them?
Good question. Yeah, internal audits occur within the organization to assess training and conformity of the internal processes and systems. So audits can be done on processes, products, and systems. With that being said, an internal GMP auditor is someone who will come in and assist the company by ensuring that all the proper quality and GMP specifications are being achieved. And typically the goal of an internal audit or the benefit is to illuminate any gaps in the quality plan to ensure that the products are safe, pure, and effective.
Trevor, just mechanically, how does a company go ahead and get signed up to do an audit?
Excellent question. I want to play off of what Jen was just saying real quick and just say that it's important for your management system team or food safety management system team in the operation to be multi-departmental, because it's better to have a second set of eyes who is not seeing the same thing every single day. Sometimes they're part of sales, sometimes they're part of office, they're just doing admin work. And so they have a really good way of evaluating documentation if it's pen and paper. Nothing wrong with that. But to answer the question, how does an operation get audited? What do they do first? Is they have to make that management commitment first and foremost. The culture is incredibly important. Anybody can come in and start saying things, but if it's not really being practiced throughout the entire operation, it's not really going to go very far. And next, you're going to start prepping early and you're going to sign up with the CB of your choice. You can cost them out, which one you find to be least expensive or not. They're all probably well in the same cost line, and put it on the calendar. When is it going? Then you get the scheme to actually go in and start evaluating the operation. Just go section by section. You know, first and foremost, generally management commitment is first. So is it in writing? Is it signed? And then how can you prove the management commitment? Are the resources in place? Does the team have the supportive members of that operation to flourish? Do they have the tools that they need? Have they been dedicated the time? You really can't just say something. You have to actually prove it through and through. And through that process, when they come in to give an assessment, that's how you have to earn the certification. You don't just get a piece of paper with a stamp on it. You truly have to earn it and continuously hold it.
Thanks, Trevor. I think that's a great way to end our direct questioning. I'm going to ask just one more question, and we'll do a lightning round. We'll start with Trevor. And I just want to, one sentence from each of you, because we're approaching 10 minutes before the hour. I want to give Brian some more time and get some questions from the audience. But what's one way that a company can kind of go the extra mile during this crazy time we're living in?
One way a company can go an extra mile is use the opportunity to create a emergency and business continuity plan. It's not required. If you're going for those third-party schemes, you will see the presence of it, and then that's where the requirement changes. But you have a list of who do we call when this happens. That's my one-liner.
Jen, any advice for the community?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that as this time is kind of happening is to re-educate your employees, like really make sure your training's there, educate on cross-contamination, and making sure that when you're putting these new policies in place, you're also thinking about how are you taking those policies out? How are you, if you're putting on cloth masks, how are you taking them off? What are you doing with them? So just really retraining and re-education.
Alina, your best recommendation?
Would be to review and revise your cleaning procedures during this time. Implement extra disinfection for common areas and consider the availability of your disinfectants. You definitely don't want to run out of things. So contact key suppliers, not only of your materials, but of your sanitation materials to make sure that there won't be any significant disruptions.
And last, Haley.
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback off of the training aspect, you also want to make sure that you're cross-training as many employees as possible, just in case, some employees can't come to work because they've shown symptoms or are caring for someone in their household with symptoms. That way you'll still have employees that are able to, really do all of the tasks and continue business.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn this over to Brian now to start the Q&A.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew, and all the panelists. That was a great conversation. We have gotten a lot of questions in the chat room throughout the presentation. So I'm going to try and highlight maybe 2 to 3, depending on how long the answers for each of these take, so that we still have a few minutes to stick to our timeline and close the presentation out with a few introductory or explanatory slides about upcoming events and some other announcements. So let's dive into this. And a few of these questions are quite technical, so I apologize to the attendees that pose these if I do a disservice to them or I'm not posing them correctly. So let's just start off chronologically. From Kirk Scramstad, we only produce cannabis flower and cannabis concentrates, no edibles, patches, drinks, etc. Is there a benefit to being a CGMP certified, and will CGMP be required for this type of operation when we do go federally legal?
That sounds like a question for Trevor.
Great question. And I think regardless of what you are manufacturing, the situation, you need to evaluate how the product is used, the consumption of it, even if it's not something that is necessarily designed for edible, but the consumption is through inhalation. You need to evaluate your products that way.
And just to piggyback on Trevor too, I do think it is important to get CGMP'd for even just growers and cultivators, because there are a lot of hazards and things that do occur in the ground and the soil and different, organic things. So I definitely think even though you're not doing edibles and stuff, it's still very important to get CGMP certified.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, let's go to another question. What are these GMPs specifically for air quality control of pathogens?
I'm not even sure who would be best suited for that, but maybe Alina?
So specific GMPs for air quality testing. So there, like I mentioned before, there is no specific, like you have to do this test, this test, this test. It's based on what you find will help your company create products that are consistent and safe. So in a manufacturing facility that may have the risk of having yeast and mold in the air, you may want to do air sampling in that facility versus a different kind of product that may not have that risk.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Elena was saying and say that you should also be testing anywhere you have compressed air. And if the compressed air is just for the machine itself, or it's going to go through the machine itself to be introduced to the product possibly.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I think we got time for one more question. Let's go with, and if we got into time for another one, let's go with that too. But does US FDA tie in with European Union GMPs?
I can add something to that and say that the GMPs in the States are different than the GMPs out of Europe, but they piggyback off of each other. Like we call HACCP. HACCP here in the United States has 7 principles, where in Europe, Codex Alimentaris has 12 principles. So we use the 5 preliminary steps of HACCP, combine it with the 7 principles, and we have that connection there.
Okay, perfect. Let's go with one more question. So the last one that we got, with the tug of war between conventional culturing method and QPRC microbial testing, which testing program would the panelists recommend for medicinal cannabis and why?
So I'll take this one. It's going to depend on what product you're making and what you're targeting. So for flour, for instance, I feel like one of the biggest risks is total yeast and mold. And most labs across the country right now are using a conventional culture method. And that's because there is no really good qPCR method for fungal contaminants right now. qPCR is a DNA-based test. So you have to extract DNA out of your sample and then you run it on the qPCR instrument. The problem we have with using conventional culturing versus qPCR for total yeast and mold is that the qPCR test will pick up dead contaminants that are not live, that are not going to hurt people. So we tend to get higher counts using qPCR versus culture methods. They will only grow live mold or yeast that you have in your product. So if you're using some kind of decontamination step after you're growing and producing your products, qPCR will light up, even though those contaminants are dead, versus conventional plating, you won't see them.
Okay, fantastic. Super technical answer to a super technical question. So I love hearing that. I did just receive one question from our live Twitter thread that I did want to highlight, since that was the only one to come in from there before we turn it over to the closing remarks. So does anyone have experience with successful large-scale audits for cannabis farms? This person would love to see how other teams have managed their audits.
Sorry, Brad, did you say farms?
Yes.
Okay. Trevor, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so with the side of cultivation, we're applying good agricultural practices similar to GMPs, but we're making sure that it's applicable to what we're doing, because if we're not manufacturing anything on farm, let's take the manufacturing out, but we'll incorporate what is very important, like employee hygiene and health. That's always been a program written for GMP, very important for good agricultural practices as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and then just one more final question, because this one was posed in advance of the session that I wanted to address. Can any of the panelists talk about software that currently exists or that they use to help companies develop and track these CGMPs?
I'm not going to disclose any specific software, but I will tell you that there are so many options out there, but it's never a out of the box solution. It doesn't just plug in and work. You always have to fine tune it. But if that system does not work, you have to remember how to do it from the start, the beginning, the pen and paper method. Otherwise, it's not going to be very effective for you. And you need to evaluate what you want based off of the budget you're working with. Some systems come with a lot of extra added value things, and others just come with what you absolutely need.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, we are already getting some appreciation from our attendees for the responses to these questions. So thank you all to the panelists for fielding these additional questions, in addition to presenting that amazing presentation for us. For all of the attendees, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we will be providing a PDF version of this slide deck to you all immediately upon conclusion of this webinar. So if you all would like to follow up directly with any of the panelists with any additional questions that you might have, they've all encouraged us to provide this contact information and their information for the companies and NCIA members that they represent as well for your outreach and follow-up post-event. And then with that, I just want to conclude things out with a few slides. First, highlighting our sponsor for this afternoon's webinar, ASI Cannabis Safety and Quality. Yeah, there were a lot of tie-ins to the presentation and a lot of mentions and shout out about their services throughout the webinar. So if you are in need of an auditing service, definitely feel free to reach out to ASI Cannabis Safety and Quality and Tyler Williams, who is actually in the chat room right now. I'm sure he can post up his contact information for you. And feel free to follow up with them. And if any of you all are interested in sponsoring an upcoming webinar, you can head to our website to learn more about those digital marketing opportunities that we're debuting now. In case any of you all missed it, we did decide to postpone our upcoming 7th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo, which was currently scheduled to take place in June, until late September. This decision was not obviously made lightly. However, NCIA's primary goal throughout this world health pandemic crisis is protecting the health and safety of our community first and the nation at large. So you can head to the cannabisbusinesssummit.com to sign up to receive all the exciting news, which we'll be releasing in the coming weeks as that event continues to develop. And as soon as you're able to commit to traveling to an in-person trade show later this year, definitely sign up earlier rather than later. And then one side note about that event, 5 of the panelists on today's session, including Andrew, Alina, Haley, Jen, and Trevor, will all be presenting educational content at that event. So if you enjoyed their presentation styles today, you'll surely not want to miss those and other exciting sessions taking place throughout the conference. Additionally, we also have postponed our 10th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days until this fall. So mark your calendars today, as the most impactful 2 days for cannabis industry advocacy will now be held from September 15th to September 17th in Washington, D.C. And like I just mentioned, if you or your business has felt the pinch from the lack of exposure at in-person events these past few weeks, you're not alone, and NCIA is here to help you and your business. We're super excited to announce that we just released a wealth of digital marketing sponsorship packages across all of our highly trafficked platforms, and you can head to our website to learn more and then schedule a meeting with one of our biz dev team to discuss in more detail. And last but not least, I would like to formally invite all of you to attend the first edition of our new Industry Essentials educational webinar series, which is debuting next week on Wednesday, April 22nd. As most of you all probably know, NCIA has been the leader in providing unparalleled educational opportunities for our members and supporters at in-person events over the past decade, and we're working to ensure that that change doesn't change due to the new world that we all find ourselves in at the moment. Over the coming weeks, we'll be rolling out a variety of programs underneath this Industry Essentials umbrella, which is going to allow us to provide you with timely, engaging, and essential education when you all need it the most. Next week's session, being held in conjunction with Earth Day, is the first in our Policy Council Conversation series, which will give you a sneak peek into NCIA's upcoming white paper being produced by NCIA's Policy Council, which Andrew made mention of throughout the session, on sustainability in the cannabis industry, and it'll allow you to learn about tried and true sustainability practices from leading cultivators in the field. including Terrapin Care Station, Native Roots, Live Well Enlightened Health, and Cascade High. The webinar is free for all, so please head to NCIA's website to sign up today. And just to help encourage you all, you'll be redirected to that section of our website when this presentation concludes. And with that, I do want to thank all of you all so much. I do believe that Andrew has a quick closing remark about the Policy Council, which we did just mention on that last slide. So I'll turn it over to Andrew to give you a quick heads up about how you can participate in NCIA's policy crafting measures.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Just a quick shout out and thank you to Trevor and Elena specifically, who sit on the Policy Council and who participated in this webinar, and to Tyler Williams, who also sits in the Policy Council and sponsored this webinar. If you're interested in participating with us, we're a group of about 35 lawyers, doctors, scientists, cannabis entrepreneurs, and others who do quite a bit of writing on issues that are of import to the industry. So we write white papers. As you just saw, there's a white paper that's in the works coming out in June on environmental sustainability. We are about to release a paper soon on protecting your cannabis brand. We also produce other materials like comments to the federal government. So I'm in the process of drafting some public comments to the DEA that the Policy Council will be reviewing. If you're interested in participating with us, please go to our website, thecannabisindustry.org, click on Policy and Policy Council, and you'll see a 4-page description of our work. And feel free to shoot me an email, andrew@thecannabisindustry.org, if you're interested. Thanks, Brian.
Not a problem. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, as Andrew mentioned, the Policy Council is our preeminent way of getting involved in our policy efforts. So if you have any information or questions, definitely reach out to Andrew at any time. And with that, a huge thank you to all of our participants today. We had over 150 attendees in the webinar at the peak. So a big round of applause to all of you all and the panelists, which really lended their time and expertise to this fantastic panel. If you are not a member of NCIA, that is the first way that you get involved with our community and our network outside of participating in some of these free opportunities that we provide for non-members. But do be aware that that new Industry Essentials brand that we're going to be debuting is going to have some really exclusive member-only content that's going to be debuted underneath of it. So if you're not a member today, please join after this call. And we look forward to seeing you all next week on the next webinar taking place next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.